This section is formatted for direct paste into VidRush custom script mode. 200 miles onto the ice on a road exactly 1 truck wide, David saw headlights coming straight at him. There was nowhere to go. 16 inches of ice on his left, 16 on his right, and 400 feet of black water underneath. He held his line. The lights kept coming. 3 true stories from 11 winters hauling on northern ice roads. The third one Dispatch still won't put in writing. The ice roads of northern Canada are among the most dangerous trucking routes on Earth. Hundreds of miles of frozen lakes, temperatures that drop to -45 Fahrenheit, and rules that are absolute. 1 truck at a time, northbound convoys only, never meet anyone coming the other way. David has been hauling fuel to remote mines for 11 winters. He knows the route, knows the ice, knows that when dispatch says the road is clear, it is clear. But every season, on the same stretch of frozen lake, drivers report headlights. Dispatch denies them. The reports are never filed. What's really out there on mile 212? David first heard the story in his 3rd winter hauling on the ice, back when he was still new enough to think the veterans were just messing with him. He had pulled into the staging yard at Yellowknife, his rig crusted with frozen spray, and an old hand named Mike, who'd been running the Tibbet to Contoito route since the late 90s, was nursing a coffee inside the warm-up shack. Mike asked him how his run went. David said fine. Mike nodded and said, "Watch yourself around mile 212 at night." When David asked why, Mike just shrugged and said, "Robert still runs that stretch sometimes." Then he walked out into the cold and didn't explain. The Tibbet to Contoito ice road is not a road in any normal sense. It's a seasonal engineering feat scraped across frozen lakes and portages, stretching roughly 370 miles from Yellowknife up into the Northwest Territories, serving diamond mines and exploration camps that have no other land connection for 10 months of the year. 85% of the route sits directly on lake ice. When winter grips hard enough and the ice reaches 40 inches thick, it can support a 70-ton Super B train hauling diesel, explosives, and heavy equipment. The season is short, maybe 8 to 10 weeks if the cold holds. In that window, the mines need an entire year's worth of supplies moved in. There is no room for error and no room for 2 trucks meeting in the same lane. That's the fundamental rule of ice road trucking. Traffic flows in convoys, northbound only, dispatched in timed intervals. No vehicle ever travels south on the same segment. The road is 1 truck wide. The edges fall away to pressure ridges and open leads. If you meet someone head-on, there is no shoulder, no pull-off, no escape. The ice under your tires is 16 inches thick on a good day. The water beneath is 400 feet deep and cold enough to kill you in under 2 minutes. Dispatch tracks every truck by GPS. Radios check in at every mile marker, and the system is supposed to be flawless. It has to be. David knew all this by his 11th winter. By then, he'd hauled millions of pounds of fuel to mines most people will never see. He'd driven through whiteouts so complete that he navigated entirely by the glow of the berm markers reflecting his headlights. He'd felt the ice undulate beneath his axles, a slow wave that tells you you're driving on water, not ground. He'd seen the wrecked trucks that broke through and sat preserved on the lake bottom, still visible in summer through clear water. He had never in all those years seen oncoming headlights on a one-way road, but others had. The drivers who have been up there long enough don't talk about it much, not on the record anyway. You hear whispers in the prep kitchens at the camps, or over static snarled CB radios late at night when the convoy's spread out and someone's running behind. They all describe the same thing. A pair of headlights in the distance, dead ahead, on a stretch of road where nothing should be coming. The lights are always the same height as a tractor-trailer's main beams. They never veer. They just hang there, growing slowly larger, sometimes for minutes at a time, while the driver stares and tries to make sense of what he's seeing. And then, according to every single report, they simply vanish. No truck passes. No engine sound. No disturbance in the snow. Just the dark again and the driver alone on the ice with his own heartbeat hammering in his ears. There's a binder in the safety office at one of the northern mines, a thick black binder that the safety officer keeps in a locked drawer. It's not part of the official records. Inside are incident reports going back to 1998, handwritten or typed, from drivers who witnessed something they couldn't explain at mile 212. Some of them are a single sentence. Saw headlights oncoming, no vehicle. Others are paragraphs long, written by men clearly still shaken, trying to work out the logistics of how a truck could appear on a closed road and then cease to exist. Every single report places the sighting at the same marker, mile 212, the deepest part of Arai Lake where the ice road crosses the widest basin of black water. In 1998, that's exactly where a fuel hauler broke through. The driver was a man named Robert, a veteran with over a decade of ice road experience. He wasn't scheduled to be on that run. He'd swapped shifts with another driver at the last minute. Nobody was quite sure why. He was northbound, hauling a full tank of diesel when the ice gave way. The truck went down in seconds. The crack was heard by a convoy nearly a mile behind him, a sound one witness later described as God snapping a frozen tree in half. When the lead driver reached the hole, there was nothing left but black water and a plume of diesel shimmering on the surface. The truck and Robert were gone. The depth at that point was over 300 feet. Recovery was deemed impossible. He's still down there. No official explanation was ever issued for why the ice failed at that spot. The thickness had been measured the day before at over 38 inches, well within the safety margin for the load Robert was carrying. Some engineers speculated about a warm spring current weakening the sheet from below. Drivers had their own theories. Robert had been pushing hard, they said. Maybe too hard. Maybe he missed a radio check. Maybe the ice had been talking to him in those deep groans and cracks that every trucker learns to read, and he didn't listen. Or maybe he didn't care. The first headlight sighting happened the following winter. A driver running the same route, same time of night, radioed dispatch in a panic saying he had eyes on a northbound vehicle. Dispatch confirmed the road was clear. The lights closed to within 50 feet and then were gone. When the driver stopped and walked the ice with a flashlight, he found tire tracks directly in front of his truck. They led south toward him for maybe 40 yards and then stopped dead in undisturbed snow. No vehicle, no driver, just tracks that appeared and ended as if something had been there and then simply blinked out of existence. At least one driver reports it every winter since. One per season, sometimes two. The sightings cluster in February when the ice is coldest and the darkness is longest. No one has ever hit anything. No one has been harmed. The drivers file their reports, the safety officer files them in the black binder, and life on the ice goes on. Dispatch still says it's just a trick of the light, a reflection off blowing snow, fatigue playing games with tired eyes. The drivers who have seen it know better. David was not a superstitious man. He kept his rig maintained, his logbook clean, and his opinions about ghost stories to himself. But when he drew the overnight run in mid-February of his 11th winter, a solo haul of jet fuel to a mine 340 miles north, he couldn't shake the thought of mile 212. He'd never seen the lights himself. He'd never wanted to. The night was clear and brutal, the temperature sitting at -42 without wind chill, the cold so sharp it made the air feel brittle. The northern lights were flickering green and violet overhead, and the road stretched out ahead of him like a ribbon of white tape laid across an endless black mirror. He reached Arai Lake at a little past midnight. The ice here was always uneasy, he knew, because the lake was deep and the water underneath moved in slow currents that could thin the sheet without warning. He dropped his speed to 20 miles an hour, watching his temperature gauges, listening to the ice groan under the weight of his load. He passed mile 210, 211, and then at mile 212 he saw them. A pair of headlights, not reflections, not tricks of light. Two steady yellow-white beams, truck height directly in his lane, perfectly aligned with his own path. They were perhaps a quarter mile out, maybe less, and they were not moving to either side. David keyed his radio. His voice sounded calm even to his own surprise. "Dispatch, this is Unit 74, come back." A crackle. Then the dispatcher's voice, steady and bored. "7-4, go ahead. I've got headlights oncoming at my 212. Confirm northbound traffic." A pause, longer than it should have been. The lights ahead grew fractionally larger, fractionally brighter. 7-4, the dispatcher came back, her voice now less bored. We show no northbound traffic on that segment. Repeat, no traffic. Road is clear. David stared through the windshield. The lights kept coming, and then they started moving faster. The headlights accelerated toward him, swelling from distant pinpricks to blinding white orbs that filled the entire windshield. David's hands locked on the wheel. His foot hovered over the brake, but braking was death. You don't stop on ice with a full load. The truck could break through in seconds. His only choice was to hold his line and pray. He did. The distance between them collapsed. A quarter mile became 200 feet, then 100, then 50. David could see the shape behind the lights now, the dark silhouette of a cab, the high box of a tanker trailer, exactly like his own rig. The glare was so intense he squinted, his pupils shrinking to pinpoints, and in that moment of blindness he braced for impact. The impact never came. Between one heartbeat and the next, the lights were gone. Not fading into the distance, not swerving, not dropping off the edge. Gone. The road ahead was black and empty. A gust of wind lifted a veil of snow across the ice and then settled. Silence. David sat in his cab, engine rumbling, breath coming in ragged gasps, staring at the exact spot where a truck had been and was not. He reached for the radio with a shaking hand. Dispatch 7-4. The vehicle, the oncoming, it just disappeared. No contact. I repeat, no contact. Vehicle is gone. This time the dispatcher's pause was longer. When she came back, her voice was cautious, as if she were choosing every word from a script she hadn't read in a while. 7-4 understood. Do you see any obstruction on the road, any debris? Negative. Road's clear, but I'm telling you there was a truck, right there, big rig tanker, maybe 100 feet out, then nothing. Copy 7-4. You want to stop and inspect? David hadn't thought that far ahead. Stopping on the ice at night in the middle of the widest part of Arai Lake was against every protocol he'd been trained on. But his mind was spinning. If he kept driving, would he be able to trust his own eyes? What if the next thing he saw was real and he dismissed it as another phantom? He keyed the mic. Yeah, I'm gonna walk it. Give me 5. He pulled the rig to a crawl, then let it idle in place. The ice groaned beneath him, a long, low sound like a cello string being tightened too far. He killed the headlights to let his eyes adjust, then climbed down from the cab with a flashlight in one hand and a tire iron in the other. The cold hit him like a physical blow. At -42, the air sears exposed skin in under a minute. He pulled his balaclava up over his nose and walked forward. The road stretched out pale and empty. His boot prints were the first marks on the fresh snow that had fallen since the last convoy hours ago. He walked 20 paces, then 30, scanning the surface with the flashlight. At 40 paces, he found them. Tire tracks, deep, wide, unmistakably from a heavy truck. They were oriented southbound, coming directly toward him. He knelt and examined the tread pattern. It matched the standard Goodyear G278 tires used on the mine's own tanker fleet. The tracks were crisp, pressed deep into the snowpack, less than an hour old. He followed them backwards along his own path, heading south against the flow of traffic, tracing a route that no vehicle should have taken. The tracks ran straight and true for about 60 yards, and then they simply stopped. David shone his flashlight back and forth. There was no turn, no swerve, no break in the ice. The tracks ended in a perfect flat wall of undisturbed snow, as if the truck that made them had been lifted clean off the earth at that exact point. Beyond that line, nothing but wind-sculpted powder stretching to the far shore 3 miles away. He stood there for a long moment, the flashlight beam trembling in his grip, then turned and walked back to his cab. He didn't run, but he didn't linger. He climbed in, slammed the door, and sat with the engine idling while he tried to get his breathing under control. He keyed the radio one more time. 7-4. Tracks on the road, southbound, dead end. No vehicle. I'm continuing north. The dispatcher acknowledged with a tone that suggested she'd heard this before. David put the truck in gear and drove the remaining miles to the mine without looking in his mirrors. The mine complex emerged from the darkness around 3 in the morning, a sprawl of floodlights and steel buildings huddled against the cold. David made his drop, logged his hours, and shuffled into the mess hall for a cup of coffee that barely warmed his hands. The warmth felt unreal after the night he just had. He didn't talk to anyone. When his return run was logged, he He drove south in daylight, deliberately timing his route so that Arai Lake would be behind him before dusk. He didn't see anything unusual at mile 212, just ice and snow and the distant spine of the Arctic hills. A week passed before the safety officer knocked on the window of his cab. David was at the Yellowknife yard doing a pre-trip inspection when a man in a heavy parka with a weathered face and a clip-on badge appeared at his elbow. The badge read Roger Klein, Senior HSC Officer, Dome Lake Mine Division. He was holding a black binder. "David," he said, it wasn't a question. "You filed an incident report last Wednesday, night of the 14th. "I filed what I saw," David said. "Tracks, headlights, no vehicle." Roger nodded slowly. His face was unreadable, the kind of face that had seen too many incident reports to be surprised by any of them. "Walk with me." They went inside an empty operations trailer. Roger set the binder on a metal desk and opened it. Inside were maybe 30 pages, some typed, most handwritten, each stamped with a date going back to the winter of 1999. He flipped through them silently, letting David look. The reports were all variations on the same theme. Headlights, southbound, no vehicle. Tracks in the snow. A few of them were annotated with the word explained, but most were marked with a single succinct note in red pen, unresolved. "In 25 years," Roger said, "at least one report per winter, same spot, same description. Sometimes the driver hears an engine, sometimes just lights. Sometimes the tracks are still visible when the next convoy comes through. They last about an hour, then they disappear under fresh snow. Every driver who sees it reacts the same way. Panic, then doubt, then silence. Most of them never tell anyone outside this room." David leafed through the pages. The handwriting changed from neat cursive to cramped block letters to the shaky scrawl of men whose hands were still trembling when they wrote. One report from 2004 caught his eye. "Saw the driver," it read. "In the cab, he waved." His throat tightened. "What's causing this?" Roger closed the binder. "I'm going to tell you what I tell every driver who ends up in this room. The official position is that the sightings are a combination of fatigue, sleep deprivation, and light refraction off ice crystals in high wind. Ice road drivers work 18-hour days for weeks on end. You know how it is. You start seeing things that aren't there. That's the official position. But you don't believe that." Roger looked at him for a long time. Then he turned to a page near the back of the binder, a report from 2007, and placed a single finger on a name. "This driver," he said. "Tully, 11 years on the ice. Clean record, no substance abuse, no medical issues. He saw the headlights on a clear night in February, same as you, and swerved. He didn't hit anything, but losing the lane on ice is fatal. His truck fishtailed and rolled onto its side. He broke 2 vertebrae and was off the road for a year. When he came back, he asked to transfer off the ice route. They denied him. So he quit, moved south, never drove a truck again. He was a careful man, David. A careful, competent man who saw something that shouldn't have been there and nearly died because of it." "Was his report in here too?" Roger slid a paper across the desk. It was the same report David had spotted, the one about a driver waving. Mark's edition. After the crash, the investigators asked him why he swerved. He said the headlights he saw weren't just lights. There was a driver inside the cab. He recognized him from the safety bulletin board at the mine. It was a man who'd been dead for years. David stared at the report. His mind was trying to arrange the facts into a shape that made sense, but every time he got close, the shape dissolved. A dead man, a sunken truck, headlights that appeared every winter on the anniversary of the accident, tracks that began and ended in nothing like a thought interrupted, and now a witness who'd seen a face. "I need to know everything," he said. "Everything you know about the crash in '98, who Robert really was. Why he was on the road that night, and why the investigation never made sense." Roger walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a yellowed envelope and slid it across the desk. It was stamped with the seal of the Ministry of Transport, and across the front, in faded marker, were the words, "Case File R. Mercer, Arai Lake 2-1298, do not release." "Most of what's in here will only give you more questions," Roger said. "But if you want to understand what's happening at mile 212, you need to understand that Robert Mercer didn't just die on that road. He was sent there, and the people who sent him knew the ice wouldn't hold." David opened the envelope. Inside was a slim manila folder, its edges soft with age, containing a sheaf of documents that smelled faintly of diesel and cold storage. On top was a photocopy of the dispatch log from February 12, 1998. The entry for 1600 hours showed Unit 42 driver Robert Mercer scheduled for a northbound fuel haul to Dome Lake Mine. But below it, in different handwriting, someone had added a note. Driver substituted for Unit 39, unscheduled departure. Beneath that, another hand had written and then crossed out a single word, unauthorized. David looked up at Roger. He wasn't supposed to be in that truck. Roger shook his head. Robert Mercer was supposed to be off duty that night. He'd been suspended 3 days earlier pending an investigation into a safety complaint he'd filed against the mine operator. He claimed they were cutting corners on road maintenance, falsifying ice depth measurements to keep the season open longer. He'd been telling anyone who would listen that Arai Lake was unstable, that the measurements were being taken too far from the pressure ridges, that they were going to get someone killed. The day before he died, he told his wife he'd found proof. Proof of what? That the mine had known about a thermal spring under mile 212 for years. It created a warm current that weakened the ice from below, irregularly, unpredictably. Instead of routing the road around it, they kept the same path and just doubled the frequency of depth checks. Except the checks, according to Robert, were being falsified. Depths recorded at the edges, not over the spring. He'd managed to get his hands on a set of real measurements. Depth over the spring was 12 inches, not 38, half what it needed to be for a tanker. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. He was killed for that. He was silenced for it. The day before he died, Robert notified the Ministry of Transport that he had evidence of systematic safety violations. He was on the phone with an investigator at 4 p.m. on February 11th. By 6 a.m. the next morning, his suspension had been quietly lifted. No email, no written notice. A supervisor called him at home and told him to get back on the road. They needed every available driver, he said. A big push before a storm. Robert wasn't stupid. He knew it was a setup. But he also knew that refusing would be insubordination and would cost him his job and any credibility he had left. So he got in the truck. And the ice broke. It broke exactly where he said it would. The official investigation ruled it an unforeseen natural event, a sudden pressure ridge shift. The thermal spring was never mentioned. The falsified measurements were never mentioned. Robert's prior complaints were buried. His wife was told it was an accident and given a settlement from the mine's insurance carrier. She took the money and moved south. The investigator at the Ministry of Transport was transferred to a desk job in Ottawa 3 weeks later. File was sealed. David stared at the papers in front of him. A dead man who had tried to warn them, killed by the very thing he'd predicted. And now, every winter, a pair of headlights appeared at the spot where he went down, traveling northbound on a southbound bearing, as if the man was still making that run he'd been forced to take. But that wasn't the part that froze David in his chair. "Roger," he said, his voice low. "If Robert was northbound, why does every driver see headlights coming south?" Toward them. Roger was silent for a moment. Then he turned to the very last page of the binder, a report dated just 3 weeks earlier. "Because we've seen 2 sets now. The first set northbound, Robert's original path. The second set southbound appeared for the first time in 2006, and that one isn't Robert." David's blood went cold. "In 2006, Roger said, a driver named Kevin Shaw vanished on this same stretch of road. He was southbound, empty, returning from a mine run at night in heavy weather. He reported headlights on the radio, said someone was coming toward him, and then he stopped transmitting. By the time the next convoy reached his last known position, his truck was gone. No wreckage, no oil slick, no body, just a hole in the ice that had already skimmed over with fresh ice. The official finding was that he'd blown a tire, lost control, and gone through. But here's the thing. Kevin Shaw wasn't just any driver. He was one of the men who had falsified the ice depth measurements in 1998. He'd been a junior surveyor back then. He'd signed off on the numbers that killed Robert. He'd moved into driving years later. And the first season he drew a night shift on Arai Lake. The first night he was ever alone on that road, he vanished. David pushed back from the desk. The implications were unspooling faster than he could contain them. If Robert's ghost had been a warning or a memory or something trapped in a loop, then what was the second set of headlights? A hunter. It was a hunter. Does anyone in management know about this? David asked. Roger gave him a look that was heavy with years of institutional silence. The mine knows. The transport company knows. They've known for years. They keep the binder locked up because they don't want to admit that the road is haunted by their own mistakes. But it's worse than haunted, David. The sightings are getting more frequent. Not 1 per season anymore. 5 per season. 6. Last winter, 7 drivers reported seeing something at mile 212 before the ice even hit full thickness. And the shelf life of this road is collapsing. The ice season used to run 10 weeks. Now we're lucky if we get 7. The warm currents are spreading. The spring Robert found isn't the only one. There are 3 others along this route that the surveyors aren't marking. And every time they send a truck over them, they're rolling the dice. David thought about the ice groaning beneath him as he'd idled at mile 212, the sound it made, like a warning it was too late to hear. I need to talk to the other drivers, David said, the ones who saw the lights and still run this road. Roger reached into the binder and pulled out 3 names. There are 5 still driving who have reported seeing both sets of headlights. One of them won't talk about it at all. 2 will tell you it was just exhaustion. But there are 2 others, men who have been on this road longer than any of us, who might tell you something different. They both say the same thing, that the headlights aren't just a memory. They're a signal, a warning that the ice is about to break, and that every time it's appeared, a truck has gone through within 72 hours. He pushed a slip of paper across the desk. On it were 2 names, Tommy Ockvik and Ede LaPointe. Both men had over 20 winters on the ice. Both had lost friends to the water, and both, according to Roger, had heard something extra at mile 212 that they'd never put in writing. Not headlights, not a horn, not an engine, a voice. David left the operations trailer and walked back out into the cold. The sun was low and pale against the horizon, casting long blue shadows across the snow. He got in his truck and sat there for a long time before starting the engine. He was scheduled to run again in 2 days. Same route, same lake. Same mile marker. He could quit. He could walk away like Mark Tully, like the ones who never came back to the ice. But David already knew he wasn't going to, because the lights had appeared to him. And if the pattern held, that meant someone was going to go through the ice at mile 212 within 72 hours. And if no one listened, it would be him. He started the engine and pulled out of the yard. He wasn't heading north yet. He was heading to find the 2 men who had heard a voice in the middle of a frozen lake and lived to tell about it. Tommy Ockvik lived in a small house on the outskirts of Bechoko, a place that existed mostly so he could walk to the lake when he needed to think. He was 72 years old, retired from the ice roads for nearly a decade, but his eyes still had the 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen things the cold couldn't freeze out. David sat across from him at a Formica table while Tommy poured coffee into a chipped mug and didn't speak for a full minute. It was February of 2010, Tommy said finally. I was hauling a load of cement powder north, dead of night solo. You know how it gets. The drone of the engine, the heater on full, your eyelids so heavy you'd sell your soul for 5 minutes of sleep. I was coming up on mile 212 when my CB crackled. Not the usual static, but a voice. A man's voice. It said, "Slow down, there's a crack ahead, clear as I'm speaking to you now." He paused to take a sip of coffee. His hand didn't shake, but it didn't look steady either. I keyed the mic and asked who was transmitting. Nothing, just dead air. I slowed anyway, down to 10 miles an hour, and about 100 yards ahead of me there was a pressure ridge that had buckled the ice. A fresh crack, maybe 6 feet wide, just starting to open. If I'd hit that at convoy speed, I'd have gone in nose first with 60 tons behind me. I radioed dispatch, they marked it, and I went around. The next day, a driver I knew, a kid named Ronnie, didn't get the warning. He went through at that same crack. They never recovered the truck. David felt the hair on his arms rise. You think the voice was Robert? I don't think, I know. I knew Robert when he was alive. He had a way of saying things a little lilt, like he was from the East Coast originally. The voice on the CB had that exact same lilt, and the words he used. Robert always said slow down to new drivers like a catchphrase. He wanted everyone to get home safe, even now. Tommy leaned forward. "There's something else." I heard it again 3 years later, but this time it wasn't just a warning, it was a question. It came over the radio and asked, "Do you see them? The headlights?" I didn't answer. I was too scared, but I knew what it meant. When you see the headlights, someone is going to die at mile 212 within 72 hours. Robert's trying to warn us, but he can't stop it. He can only give us enough time to get out of the way. David left Tommy's house with that sentence still echoing in his head. Enough time to get out of the way. He drove another hour and a half to find Ede LaPointe, the second name on Roger's list, at a truck stop near Fort Providence. Ede was a broad man with a thick gray beard and hands that looked like they could crush a steering wheel. He agreed to talk only if David walked with him outside, away from the listening hum of vending machines and fluorescent lights. "I heard the voice in 2015, Ede said, his breath fogging in the air. "I was driving a convoy lead, and my CB went off with a message so loud it made my ears ring. It said, 'Get off the ice now,' over and over like a loop. I stopped the convoy and called it in. Dispatch chewed me out, but I wouldn't budge. We sat there for an hour in the dark, waiting, and then the ice shifted. Not a crack, but a whole section of lake rose up and dropped again like something huge had moved underneath. The road in front of us was shattered for 100 yards. If we'd kept going, we'd all be dead. Every last one of us." He pulled his coat tighter. "The company never put that in the official log. They said it was a precautionary stop due to a mechanical issue. They don't want anyone to know that the ice road is alive and talking to us, because if they admitted that, they'd have to admit that the warm springs Robert found aren't static. They're spreading. And one day, maybe sooner than anyone thinks, the whole lake could open up at once." That was the thing that David couldn't stop thinking about as he drove back to Yellowknife that evening. The warm springs weren't static. The ice season was shrinking year by year. The headlight sightings were happening earlier in the winter, more frequently, and now the voice was being heard by multiple drivers. Whatever Robert had discovered in 1998 wasn't just a single pocket of warm water. It was a sign of something much larger, a system of thermal currents carving away at the lake's frozen skin from below, and the mine's routing hadn't changed in 3 decades. They were still sending trucks over the same weak points, season after season, betting that the ice would hold one more time. And the headlights, those impossible southbound lamps, were a collective alarm, a chorus of the dead trying to warn the living. David was scheduled for another northbound run the next night. He stared at the dispatch sheet, the familiar coordinates, the waypoint markers he'd crossed 100 times without thinking. Mile 212. He'd seen the headlights on February 14th. Tommy had heard the voice 3 days before Ronnie's truck went through. Ede had heard it an hour before the ice shattered. The pattern was as clear as the ice was thin. If David took that run, he wouldn't be coming back. He made his decision at midnight. He called dispatch and told them he was switching to day runs only, effective immediately. There was pushback, confusion, and edge of disbelief on the other end of the line. Day runs paid less. Day runs were slower, but David didn't care. He'd rather be alive to see the sun on the snow than another pair of headlights in the dark. The next night, a driver named Frank Gagnon took the route that David had been assigned. Frank was a good driver, careful, experienced, 12 winters under his belt. He hadn't filed any incident reports. He hadn't seen the headlights. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he didn't listen when David tried to warn him about mile 212. Frank left at sundown. By midnight, his truck was at the bottom of a Rye Lake, 400 feet down, the cab filling with water so cold that the human body stopped signaling pain after 7 seconds. There were no witnesses, no mayday call. The only thing the convoy behind him found was a jagged hole in the ice, already beginning to freeze over, and a single set of tire tracks that stopped at the edge. When the news reached David the next morning, he sat in his truck and didn't move for an hour. The official report attributed the accident to a sudden pressure ridge shift, the same language they'd used in 1998. There was no mention of the headlights Frank might have seen before he went through, no mention of the warm springs, no mention of the binder. David walked into Roger's office with the dispatch sheet in his hand and laid it on the desk. "Frank's gone," he said, "and we both know why." Roger looked older than he had a week ago. "I've filed my own report with the ministry." Off the record. They'll investigate maybe, or they'll do what they always do and wait for the season to end so they can forget about it until next year. How many more? David asked. How many more drivers have to go through the ice before they reroute the road? Roger didn't answer, because they both knew the answer was at least one more, maybe two. The mine was 340 miles north, and the road was the only way in. Closing it for a year to map the warm currents would cost tens of millions of dollars. Keeping it open cost a few lives a decade. The math, as cold as the ice itself, had already been done. David drove days for the rest of that season and every season after. He saw the headlights one more time, a year later, right at dusk, before full darkness had settled in. They flickered at the edge of his vision and were gone, as if acknowledging that he'd already gotten the message. He gripped the wheel, held his line, and kept moving forward. The ice road is still there. The binder in Roger's office is thicker now than it was, stuffed with incident reports that never made it into any official log. And every winter, when the temperatures plunge and the darkness stretches on for 18 hours at a stretch, a new driver will call in a sighting. Headlights inbound. No vehicle. Southbound on a road that only goes north. Dispatch will confirm no traffic. The driver will doubt his own eyes, and somewhere in the depths of Rye Lake, 400 feet beneath the ice, Robert Mercer will keep making that run he was forced to take. Not to haunt anyone, to warn them. Because down there in the black water, where the temperature never rises above freezing and the diesel still seeps from a cracked tanker, there's one thing that even the cold couldn't silence. And it's still trying to tell anyone who will listen that the ice is getting thinner. And it's getting thinner faster than anyone wants to admit. The ice road season that used to stretch 10 solid weeks now barely holds 7. The warm springs Robert Mercer found in 1998 aren't isolated anomalies anymore. They're spreading, a network of invisible rivers carving away at the frozen surface from below. Scientists call it climate feedback. Drivers call it the lake waking up. Whatever name you give it, the math is brutal. More open water, less ice, higher stakes. And the same mines still need their fuel, their explosives, their cement powder. The trucks keep rolling. The drivers who still run this road do so knowing what's beneath them. They've heard the stories. Some of them have seen the headlights with their own eyes. A handful have heard that voice crackling through the CB radio, telling them to slow down, to hold back, to get off the ice while there's still time. They don't talk about it in the yards or the mess halls. It's bad luck, and besides, who would believe them? But at night, when the convoy stretches thin and the darkness presses in from all sides, they listen. Not just to the engine and the wind, but to the ice itself, groaning like something alive. Because that's the thing about this road. It has a memory. Every truck that went through, every driver who didn't come home, left something behind. Not just wreckage on the lake floor, but a trace. A set of tire tracks that appear and vanish. A pair of headlights that shouldn't exist. A warning that repeats season after season, as if the lake itself is trying to balance the scales. Robert Mercer tried to expose the truth when he was alive, and the road killed him for it. Now he warns from the other side, and if you're lucky, you'll hear him before it's too late. David still runs days. He's still on the ice every winter, still hauling fuel to the mines, still passing mile 212 with his hands tight on the wheel and his eyes fixed straight ahead. He doesn't look for the headlights anymore, but he knows they're there, waiting in the dark, a pair of spectral beams on a road that only goes one way. And somewhere in the black water, 400 feet down, a man who was never supposed to be on that run keeps driving north on a lake that never truly freezes. If stories like this stay with you, if you believe that some warnings don't end with death, hit subscribe. There are more tales from the ice, from the long dark roads where the cold keeps secrets. We'll be back.